Today we're taking a look at Rachael Ray's Candied Walnuts recipe. While this recipe was really easy on paper, it's not without its problems. As you can see, even though I followed Rachael's instructions, I found it really hard to cover the walnuts evenly with the caramel. In fact, from this video where Rachael is cooking on her show, she may have the same problem as well. You'll note that Rachael is actually trying her best to cover the walnuts with the caramel as evenly as she can. Just take a look at the red circles where the walnuts were not covered.
You gotta work kind of fast when you do this. These are delicious for parties too.
Even after all the caramel sauce has been used, there are pockets of walnuts that have not been covered by any sauce at all.
And flaky sea salt.
So it does seem that Rachael herself is also finding it hard to cover the walnuts evenly with the caramel as well. So I thought to myself, can we make this better? To me, the perfect candied walnut will have an even and crunchy shell over the entire walnut itself. It should be sweet but not too overpowering, and it should have a strong nutty aroma as well. With a few changes and some new cooking techniques, I believe we can make a better candied walnut that not only tastes better, but is healthier for you as well. First, we'll be making Rachael's version of the recipe so we can see some of the problems that may arise and how we can deal with them. And then we'll make my version with my proposed changes so we can hopefully get a better final product. Finally, we'll taste both recipes side by side, so make sure you watch to the end. Alright, let's start by making Rachael's version of a candied walnut recipe. Her recipe can be found on her website and I'm going to link it in the video description below. So according to the recipe, we'll need about 1.5 cups worth of walnuts. Once you've got that down, lay some baking paper onto your baking tray and spread your walnuts over it as evenly as you can. Now we're going to toast the walnuts in an oven that's been preheated to about 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. Now as the walnuts are toasting in the oven, we're supposed to take this time to prepare our caramel. So according to the recipe, we'll need half a cup of sugar and we're going to heat it over moderate heat to caramel in color. Now while the recipe didn't mention this, I do think you should give your pot a few shakes or stirs to level out your sugar so your sugar can caramelize evenly. Now while the recipe does say we should use a moderate heat, I prefer to use a low or medium-low heat to reduce the chances of the caramel burning. Now one thing that really surprised me was that the recipe did not mention that you should not stir the pot as you're heating it, otherwise you'll cause the sugar to crystallize. Don't just take it from me, listen to what Anne from Cooking Like magazine has to say.
I stirred my mixture as it was cooking, and what happened is I ended up with a crystallized mess. This is no good. You should throw it out and start over, and don't stir.
Now as your caramel starts to form, it's very important that you don't walk away, otherwise it could burn very easily. Now when the sugar is nicely caramelized like this is when you can actually give it a good stir, but make sure you also take it off the heat so that it doesn't burn. So we've been toasting the walnuts in the oven for about 7 minutes and it's time to take them out, but before you do, make sure you put your oven gloves on. Now that the walnuts are toasted, it's time to pour our caramel over it. Now as Rachael mentioned earlier on in the video, we have to work fast because we can only do so when the caramel is hot. Now while I did try my best to cover the walnuts as evenly as I can with the caramel, like Rachael, I was not able to do so. I found that the moment I poured the caramel out of the pot, the caramel's temperature would drop and cause it to solidify, preventing me from spreading it evenly over the walnuts. Now we're supposed to use a fork to help coat and separate the walnuts, but as you can see I can't really do much with my fork right now. Now the recipe also didn't mention how much salt and pepper we should use, so I guess we can just add as much to taste. By now, all the caramel has solidified, so all that's left to do is to separate the walnuts. Now as you can see, there's some pieces of walnuts that hardly got any coverage from the caramel, and then there's some pieces that simply got too much. Now I decided to try this recipe a second time, but this time I placed the toasted walnuts into a bowl and I placed the caramel directly into the bowl itself. While I was hoping that this will help the caramel to cover the walnuts more evenly, it actually kinda brought on new problems. After I added the pepper and salt, I realized that the caramel and walnuts had formed into a ball and you could hardly mix anything up at all. Now when I finally got the walnuts out of the bowl was in a huge mess as there was a lot of dried caramel left at the bottom of the bowl. When I tried separating the walnuts from each other, the caramel was stretched into thin strands, which is not very visually appealing. And unfortunately, like before, the coverage of the caramel over the walnuts is still uneven. So when setting out to make a better recipe, I knew there were a few things that I wanted to achieve. Now of course the most important thing I wanted to do was to make sure that the caramel coating was even, and in addition, I wanted my version to use less sugar and to have a nuttier taste as well. So just like before, we're going to start with 1.5 cups worth of walnuts, but this time we're going to put it into a pot. Next we'll add 3.5 ounces or about 100 milliliters of water, 1 star anise, 1 cinnamon stick, and 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Now Rachael's recipe actually uses half a cup or 8 tablespoons worth of white sugar. For a healthier recipe, we're only going to use 2 tablespoons worth of brown sugar and 2 tablespoons worth of honey, which we will add later on. Not only are we effectively cutting the amount of sugar we're going to use by half, we'll still be able to get a nice brown coating over the walnuts with the brown sugar and the honey itself. So now give your pot a good mix and place it on the stove and heat it over a medium-low to medium heat. Now give the pot one last good stir and cover it. We're going to allow the sauce to come to a simmer. What we're doing right now is to allow the brown sugar and the spices that we've added to penetrate into the walnuts for better flavour and to form a nice shell around the surface. Now because we don't actually have to cook the caramel like we did before, the chances of screwing up is also a lot less. Check in every once in a while to make sure that the bottom of the pan isn't burning and give the walnuts a good stir to make sure that they're evenly coated with the sauce. You'll know you're done when you can see the bottom of the pan and most of the water has evaporated. So here you can turn off the heat so you can prevent the pot from burning. So with a spoon, remove your star anise and your cinnamon stick and chuck it away, you won't need it anymore. Now add 2 tablespoons worth of honey and 2 tablespoons worth of toasted sesame seeds. Toasted sesame seeds have an amazing nutty profile, so adding it to this dish will bring it to the next level. Now feel free to give everything a good mix. Once done, line your baking tray with some baking paper and then pour your walnuts over it. Spread the walnuts out as evenly as you can, and then toast the walnuts in an oven that has been preheated to about 320 degrees Fahrenheit or 160 degrees Celsius for about 7 minutes. By now, your walnuts should have a very crunchy and crispy sugar and honey shell. As you can see, it's actually not hard to separate the walnuts from each other as well. On close inspection, you can also see that the sugar and honey shell has evenly coated every piece of the walnut, and in addition, I also find that the sesame seeds adds a certain visual appeal. Okay guys, now it's time for the side-by-side comparison and the taste test. So here we have Rachael Ray's candied walnuts with black pepper, and here we have my spiced walnuts with toasted sesame seeds. So here you can see there's an obvious visual difference between the two recipes. For Rachael's recipe, you can actually see that the walnuts are not very evenly coated with the caramel despite my best efforts. For mine, I'm actually happy to share that the walnuts are evenly coated with the brown sugar and honey, and you can see that there's loads of flavor from the toasted sesame seeds as well. And now for a taste test. Can you hear that crunch? So the sweetness and the crunchiness from the caramel is definitely at the forefront of my palate, and it goes together quite well with the toasted walnuts that we prepared earlier. Now let's give mine a shot. So surprisingly, the first thing that I'm actually tasting is the toasted sesame seeds, which is a good thing. It actually is so nutty and it pairs so well with the walnuts. Actually, I find this a lot more addictive than this. Now because we've actually given the honey and the brown sugar a good chance to coat the walnuts evenly, and also because we added the star anise and the cinnamon, somehow the flavors from the brown sugar and honey pair together with the walnuts a lot better than how the caramel did in this recipe. This is so addictive. Now because we also use brown sugar and honey instead of just white sugar, as compared to this recipe, the sweetness that we've got from this recipe is actually a lot deeper and a lot more well-rounded, if that makes sense. Overall, I would say this version of the candied walnuts is a lot more enjoyable for me instead. Both recipes are delicious. Which one do you prefer? Let me know in the comment section below. Now if you actually enjoyed the format of this video and you want to see more videos like this, where I take my recipe and I compare it with maybe a celebrity chef's one, then let me know in the comment section below. And of course, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on your notifications, and don't forget to check out my other recipes here and here. That's all for me today. This is Ted Teo, signing off.